provides is for moderate income housing opportunities, particularly for those who are starting out in the community, construction workers, nurses, teachers, etc. In those areas zoned MFR, just hold on, let's just try to, because there's so many people, we're going to refrain from any back and forth, we're just going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. In those areas, only those areas zoned multi-family housing, MFR. This provision is only effective in that zone, in the MFR zone. It is not effective in any other zone existing in the town of Orangetown. Currently, there are 15 parcels with a total of 41.5 acres. 41.5 acres in the existing MFR zone. In that zone, there is a set-aside of 10%, obviously 1 out of 10, set aside for those making 80% of the median income in Rockland, or set aside for people making no more than about $80,000 per household. While this is a small effort to provide those wishing to stay in the community, it is specifically modeled after the PAC, the Planned Adult Community Law that we passed for Orangetown seniors, where if there was to be affordable units for seniors to apply, then the developer would get a bonus unit after each 6 units of development. So they could get 7 units per acre instead of 6. This statute before you has no bonus provision in it. It simply says that if anybody is building in the MFR zone, then they would have to provide 10% or 1 out of 10 that are moderate income units. Now, to be clear, there are essentially no MFR zones that are not spoken for. They don't have buildings on them. So this would be effective if those units are taken down and if there's any redevelopment. It would not change the density either in those zones, in the MFR zone, or any other zone in the town of Orangetown. And just one final point on the legislation as it stands. There have been questions raised about who would be eligible for the proposed 10% set-aside. Other than the income requirement, it would be set aside through a lottery when we write the regulations, like the PAC zone, or at least that's what the board would intend to do, because we can then have a preference for Orangetown residents, as we do in the PAC, in the Planned Adult Community Zone. So Orangetown residents would be those who would be eligible. And so again, just to be clear, the only place this applies is in an existing MFR zone, or if there is a zone change, number one, in the future that the town board has to consider. Now, let me be clear about zone changes. In my 14 years as supervisor, we have passed some zone changes. We have rejected other zone changes. Any change in any other zone, whether it's an R15 or an R30 or any other residential zone, would have to come before the town board. And if any town board is convinced for whatever reason that any zone change should be made to an MFR zone, then in that zone, 1 out of 10 would have to be made available for people of moderate means making up to $80,000. It does not, in my opinion, give any incentive, certainly for a developer to come before us for a zone change, because at least on the margin, they'd be making a little less because of the 1 moderate income unit out of 10 that is available. And while this is consistent with what other communities have done both here and in the region, it's really only relevant what makes sense for Orangetown. So on that score, finally, let me just add these points. Nothing in the proposed zoning would provide for any rezoning whatsoever, number one, for any increase in density either in a new zone or in the existing MFR zone, number 2, or permit or facilitate any downzoning or any increase in density. The only issue, and I'm going to recommend the board take this out so there's no ambiguity. If you go all the way to the end of the statute, when we were considering this, there's a sentence that says that if a developer in an MFR zone wants to build more than the 10%, then the planning board would have the discretion to increase zoning density. To resolve any ambiguity about that, I'm going to recommend we take that out, so there's no reference whatsoever to any possible increase in density, at least from this law that we have before us. And the final point, and I appreciate everybody's indulgence in allowing me to summarize. The final point is this. With regard to the two most significant, certainly the most significant and a recently made available parcel in Orangetown that many people are concerned about, this unequivocally does not, nor will not, impact two large tract developments. One is the Rockland Psychiatric Center property, and the second is the African Inland Mission property. And the reason why it will not impact that is that both my Republican and Democratic board members, current and predecessors, and I think I could say successors, have no interest or any inclination in rezoning either of those parcels to multi-family residential, the only place where this would apply. The reason for that has nothing to do with the 10% set aside for moderate income housing. It has everything to do, in the case of Rockland Site, and actually in the case of the African Inland Mission as well, to the impact of on the Pearl River School District of any rezoning to that kind of MFR zone that would permit so many residential users. The impact on the school district, that was the reason why the Orangetown Town Board bought the property from New York State to begin with, and some of us were on the board at that time. And the reason was because the impact on the school district would far outweigh any benefit to the Orangetown community. Nothing in this legislation would in any way enhance or give any motivation to any developer, number one, but more importantly, the town board, to rezone either of those properties for MFR. And that is the most important thing I wanted to communicate to you, and the other board members can speak about that when their opportunity is.